Well, we shall stay tuned and anxiously await that. But joining us now in the studio, Hunter Estes, Senior Director, Policy and Communications for the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Thanks, as always, for coming in, Hunter.
Thanks for having me, Gerard. Happy to be here.
Yeah, same to you, sir. So it's been a rather active legislative session here in Mississippi in 2022. It's hard to believe, but it seems like the medical marijuana debate kind of took all the air out of the room, as the saying goes, for so many months since the Supreme Court struck down the citizen-initiated ballot measure.
Right.
And so that's just been gaining steam and just got to be a really big, hotly contested issue. Mm-hmm. But, heck, it's law now, so we've moved on from that.
That's exactly right. That's very true. And I like the way you put it. It kind of sucked all the air out of the room. And that seems to be the way a lot of things work in politics sometimes. Yeah. A couple of issues at a time. The attention span's only so large. So everything gets one bit of attention, and it takes away from a lot of the other good stuff that's happening as well, unfortunately. And so
I agree.
I like the way you put it, too. It's been an active legislative session.
Yeah.
That is definitely the case. And sometimes that's of concern. You got to watch the pocketbook when the legislature is active, but thankfully this year things have been pretty good so far, and so I've been pretty optimistic.
Okay.
There's a range of good bills moving through that we're watching from the center. A couple good things. I took a couple notes down today. We just saw even the last couple of days there was some movement. One bill worth highlighting, HB 1685, coming from the Speaker's office, gives income tax credits for donations to pregnancy resource centers.
Okay.
And so I think this is really the heart of the transition to the post Roe v. Wade world. And Mississippi is trying to lead the charge on that. In essence, recognizing, depending on what happens in this Dobbs case, come June, we'll probably hear from the Supreme Court. But our legislators are trying to prepare in a really positive way in trying to support these pregnancy resource centers that mostly help low-income women around the state who are dealing with typically an unexpected pregnancy. For example, the Center for Pregnancy Choices, CPC, here in Jackson, which does wonderful work.
Yeah.
And so things like that are happening, And so while the air oftentimes gets sucked up by one issue, there's cases like that where there are really positive steps being taken to help advance an issue like the pro-life cause. There are transparency issues, too. There's a couple bills in the Senate. Senator Blackwell has one, SB 2081, that allows for the removal of state officers if they're not doing their job.
Wow.
SB 2087 from Senator Nicole Boyd ensures that meetings are actually broadcast virtually, so that just like this now. So public meetings, municipal meetings of the government in terms of certain that aren't right now required to be presented virtually.
So this would apply across all levels of government?
So there are certain restrictions. There are certain carve-outs in terms of places where it might be too difficult to guarantee that every single meeting.
Yeah.
I think some of those are on the city or municipal level, and those are understanding. But mostly it's a broad sweeping proposal to ensure that the public has access to which. And so there are a lot of small things like that again kind of go under the radar, but are really tangible steps forward, which are positive. We talk so much too. It seems like sometimes nothing's getting done, but at the end of the day, it's good to see some of these small steps forward. Which help the state just perform a little bit better.
So let's clarify that the first measure that you cited would implement tax credits.
That's right.
Tax credit as opposed to a deduction.
That's right.
This is a dollar-for-dollar offset of one's tax liability if they donate to these qualified organizations that assist women with these pregnancy choices and that matter in their lives.
Exactly right. And I think principally that just makes more sense from at least from a free market approach. Offering tax credits is always the more positive way instead of direct expenditures.
Sure.
And so in that sense, it encourages private investment.
That's right. Yeah.
And we already know Mississippi consistently ranks as the most generous state in the entire nation.
Sure does.
Which I think is really kind of incredible. I mean, on a per capita basis, everyone's always talking about Mississippi's in 50th place, whether it be or how much, across the board.
Yeah.
But on the statistics that really matter, in my opinion, quality of life, how happy people are, the generosity of people, the religiosity of people, Mississippi's consistently first or second, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is kind of an odd sort of combination if you think about it.
Right.
We're economically the poorest, but we're the most generous.
Yeah. And I think that confuses a lot of people, especially in the big cities around America. You know, they think, oh, okay, well, Mississippi's, they're not first on this, so how can you be happy? How can you be? And I think it takes living here. It takes knowing Mississippi and knowing the people and how full their hearts are and how generous they are to see how policies like this can have such an impact too.
Absolutely.
We're a place where nonprofit-driven efforts like pregnancy resource centers can have a real impact on people's everyday lives. And, it also shows that government doesn't have to be the one to constantly step in. Some folks have the immediate reaction, typically on the left, that, if there's an issue, we need government to kind of top-down jump in. But we know typically it's those bottom-up grassroots approaches that deal with people's everyday lives on the closest level. That's the best way to have an interaction and ultimately have some level of success in a policy change.
Yeah. All right. So in terms of the efforts by the Center for Public Policy, what has been signed into law this session and that's notable that you consider victories and consistent with your policy advocacy positions? What's still waiting and what didn't make it?
Yeah, definitely. So most things are still moving right now. We're kind of at that midway point where the House and Senate are starting to consider each other's pieces of legislation.
Always fun.
It is always fun. It's always a little anxiety ridden too, because you don't know what's going to happen at this point in the process.
Yep.
One of the ones we talked about at the very beginning that we're keeping a close eye on still too. Senator McClendon has a great piece of legislation dealing with critical race theory. I know a lot of your listeners, a lot of the folks that follow us are particularly concerned with this issue, the presence of critical race theory in the classroom. And so this bill's still moving. It's on the House's side now, hopefully to be taken up for consideration soon. It passed with a wide margin on the Senate side. Applaud the Senate for doing that. And so we're hopeful about that. We want to see that continue to move forward. Obviously, we talked before, the income tax issue. That is the heart of a lot of the conversation right now. And I'll note, there are different proposals on the table. People are talking about it from different perspectives. But one really positive thing, I think, for the state here right now is the executive. Governor Reeves has been very strong on this issue. Both chambers of the House and the Senate are now all on the same page in that Mississippians deserve some level of tax relief.
Yeah.
They have all, and there are differences between the proposals, but all have said universally that Mississippians deserve some level of tax relief, which is an incredibly positive first step in our opinion. In that regard, hopefully leading to tangible outcomes that will actually benefit Mississippians. But again, especially with the state of the country on a national level, inflation is skyrocketing, and it's only going to continue. Especially you've been covering what happened today with Ukraine, and that's going to impact gas prices. I just filled up my car before getting here, and so folks are seeing tangible poor policymaking on the national level, and it's hitting them where it hurts. It's hitting them in the amount of food that they're able to put on the table for their families, the amount of gas that they're able to get. And so any level of tax relief is that has an immediate impact on people's everyday lives, because that's the amount of money that they take home and the amount of tangible investment they can now put back into their family, which is all the more important when we have national proposals that are essentially running counter to ensuring that the average Mississippian gets as much of their money back into their own hands.
Sure. And you make a good point, Hunter, about the fact that at least we seem to have broad support in government for some form of tax relief. There's not a consensus yet on the approach, the degree to which that relief should be provided. But it's a little bothersome, I must say, that we even have to sort of take note of that when we have an all-Republican government, right? I mean, that should have been something that should just occur naturally as part of being part of the party. And I'm like you. I'm happy that it's out in the open. We're talking about it. We're moving towards something. But we really shouldn't even have to say it.
Right. And I think on the grassroots level, this is one of the issues that folks are most concerned about.
Sure.
When I hear people talk, especially at the beginning of the session, I heard folks had major concerns regarding the medical marijuana issue. Folks had concerns about the ballot initiative process and income tax. And those were consistently echoed. Okay, what are folks going to do for me? And we've seen positive action taken on medical marijuana now. We've seen positive action taken on the ballot initiative. And so I think the next step is really tackling and hopefully diving into this income tax issue.
Yeah, I I agree. I have described it here in the last week or so as rapidly evolving into such a contested and debated issue that it may reach the level of the medical marijuana debate in the state of Mississippi. Because this is going to continue,
for sure,
depending on what happens this session. I think it's going to continue. But we got a break. You hang around with us?
Absolutely.
We got Hunter Estes from the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. We'll come back and talk more about important policy being considered in the state of Mississippi.
Really gets you amped up to talk about legislation. That's the way to do it.
Exactly. That's awesome. How about this? Derek in Greenwood on the C Spire text line. Gas up 10 cents in 4 hours. Filled up right after 8 for $3.10. Now same station, $3.20. And before we get back into some legislative and policy matters in Mississippi, Rhino, report to us what you just read us off the air about what's going on militarily.
Yeah, as far as the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces, at least one platoon of Russian forces has surrendered to the Ukrainian Defense Force. The 74th Motorized Rifle Brigade surrendered near Chernihiv. The sergeant of the brigade said that they were not told they were going to kill Ukrainians. They were told they were going to gather information. So when they hit resistance, they surrendered.
How about that? That could turn the tide here of Putin's intentions if he's got a military that, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think he cares if people die or suffer catastrophic loss of life or property. I don't think he cares. Just as long as he's at the top of the heap and he gets the spoils that a tyrant would in such a conflict, he's on board with it. Hunter Estes is our guest, Senior Director of Policy and Communications at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. All right, so before we went to break, just talking about what you guys consider to be legislative wins and what's still hanging out there and what you're disappointed in, shall we say, that didn't make it.
Yeah, and I'll jump into two more here. We were talking before about the kind of bills that haven't gotten as much attention. The air sometimes gets sucked out of the room.
Appreciate that.
Two more really good ones that we're tracking right now. HB 917 from Representative Jansen Owen is a bill that essentially reduces the regulatory burdens that exist arbitrarily on home-based businesses.
Right.
We saw over the course of the pandemic, thousands, in Mississippi alone, thousands of businesses started from people's homes. And it was amazing. I mean, I want to say the numbers out of the Secretary of State's office showed that it was a record-breaking year regarding the number of businesses that were kicked off, which, we should be doing everything we can from a Mississippi state perspective to encourage that entrepreneurial drive and support those kinds of opportunities instead of potentially hindering those folks
Absolutely.
Who are trying to innovate and provide for their families. And so that's a great bill, great piece of legislation. And another one on the transparency front, we've talked before about the state of higher education and the difficulties that are faced there. Representative Donnie Bell, HB 464. This is a really great piece of legislation. It's a college cost transparency. It essentially ensures that the colleges around the state have publicly available to potential students the actual costs that might be entailed by attending the university. And with that too, now students can factor in what are they actually looking at in terms of, okay, what am I going to be spending for this education, for this potential degree I want to get? And then with that too, what is my basis for returns? If I want to get a degree in engineering, there's probably a bit more of a cost basis expenditure that factors in than, if I'm getting a degree in another subject field. And so encouraging Mississippi students, especially right now where, we have this national student debt crisis where so many students were essentially pushed into a college system without really the fullness of understanding of transparent cost analysis. And so bills like that for transparency levels of awareness on the state level play a huge role in terms of just the average decision-making capabilities. Folks, the average Mississippian doesn't have access to the massive, research capacities of the legislature when determining legislation. Most folks are trying to operate off of Google, and so the easier it can be made for folks to access information, especially when it comes to their future college education, that makes major life decisions that much easier for the average Mississippian, which is pretty special.
Well, these kinds of things don't really get a lot of attention.
Right.
But I do think they have a positive impact.
Yeah.
on the state when they get through. And hopefully they get traction such that we keep sort of chipping away at this bad policy that I think stands in the way of the market doing its thing and producing the best outcomes for Mississippians. So hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty, which you're exactly right. There is so much standing piles of legislation and policy and regulations that have been racked up over 100 years of state government history, know, and so essentially the difficulty that we face as coming from the free market perspective is chipping away at a mountain of regulatory burdens that exist and stifle the average Mississippian from fulfilling their participation in the American dream.
So true, so totally true. I agree with you. So what do you think we're set for with respect to this big income tax matter and the tax structure here in the state of Mississippi? What do you see?
Well, it's a great question. We have the kind of competing proposals now, taking it from different angles. I'm not too sure what the next step's going to be. It seems like everyone is talking about it now, which is good. And with that too, I think everyone realizes that some level of tax relief is really important. Like we were talking about before the break. This is where people typically talk and often pay attention more to federal policy, federal politics. But at the end of the day, this is where, in terms of the rubber hitting the road, state policy affects 90% of people's life vastly more than national policy and politics really do. And this is why these kind of localized debates have such an outsized impact. And so I think, any approach we can take where ultimately what we need to realize is that reducing the income tax burden for the average Mississippian has a multiplying effect. We've seen some comparisons. There were a couple of news outlets that talked about Medicaid expansion as an alternative to growing the economy. And what we need to realize is, philosophically, the better way to produce economic results is direct investment from a grassroots level by returning money to the individual that actually is giving it up. Artificially stimulating the economy is proven to consistently not have long-term results. We see that from the Stimulus Act in 2008. We see that from the 1930s in the Rooseveltian policies during the Great Depression, which now many economists have shown actually likely extended the Depression because it reduced the capacity for localized investment from the individual level and created artificial levels of economic stimulation, which didn't heed any long-term results. And so, what we need to realize is we talk so much about Mississippi economic development and workforce development, and perhaps the single greatest thing that can be done is simply returning money to the average individual Mississippian and allowing them to choose for themselves how they're going to invest it in the economy. Because that has that natural level of investment that isn't artificial from a top-down perspective, and now allows the economy to grow in a way which is ultimately expansive. Governor Reeves put out this great article, I think it was a day or two now, that showcased that of some of the fastest-growing cities in America, I think it was 7, 8 of the 9 of them are all in no-income tax states. There's a trend here. It's pretty clear. We look around the country at where the growth is. It's Florida, it's Tennessee, it's Texas. There's a reason that U-Haul companies are doing particularly well in New York and California right now. And we don't want to be on that end of the spectrum. We want to be on the Texas, Florida, and Tennessee side. So it's a model to follow.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And here in Mississippi, being one of 3 states I think that lost population in the last census, we got to do everything we can to differentiate.
Right.
And we're actually would be falling behind the number of other states that are pursuing elimination of their income tax. Had Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, on the program yesterday talking about that. And so it puts us in a less competitive position. We're already in a difficult competitive position.
Absolutely.
So we need to really enhance the opportunities here and the environment to attract more more business expansion, more business investment. I think the governor's right in his analysis with respect to that. But then we've got to promote it, Hunter. This is something I've really talked about a lot on the program. If we get something done here, this is great. We all support that in terms of really transformational change of the tax structure. We got to promote it. We got to sell it. It's not gonna sell itself. And I just hope that that's considered as part of the overall package, that it's great to have a good solution, as we would say in my business, but if somebody's out there selling it, nobody knows about it.
Exactly.
And that's a risk we have that I hope we can take into consideration. But we seem to be at odds between the two houses, as you well know, with the competing proposals. Certainly we can get something done here.
I think so. I'm really optimistic about it. And like you said, I think whatever we do, there's only so much you can spread by word of mouth.
That's right.
But Mississippi is a destination place. I moved here myself 3 years ago. My folks just bought a place. They're moving to Mississippi.
Awesome.
We're going to continue trying to convince other people to come here too. And I think big, sweeping, broad proposal changes that expand the economy here, that's the way to do it.
I totally agree. And I appreciate you guys and the work you do and keeping up with all this legislation, because it's a boatload of it that flows through there every year. It's been a good discussion, Hunter. Please give my regards to the rest of the team there at Center for Public Policy, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot. Hunter Estes, Senior Director of Policy and Communications for the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. We got half an hour of talk left, and Rhino's going to give away some concert tickets as well. Stay with Middays.